right, hey you guys, welcome back to Taking Flight with me. My name is Mike Rocket Blackstone. Today is the 11th of January, 2025. The latest intel on this crash, Jeju Airlines Flight 2216 that crashed on December 29th, 2024 at approximately 9:04 a.m. local time in South Korea, has released the final latest data, which is that the CVR, the Cockpit Voice Recorder, and the data, the crash data from the black boxes, both units, nothing. They don't have anything from the last 4 minutes released today. It says both black boxes, the flight data recorder and the Cockpit Voice Recorder, nothing. The last 4 minutes. Surprising, right? So what we have here, what I'm going to give you is what we do know so far. So if you're just joining us for the first time, this is the known data that we have. So the crash happened on December 29th. On January 2nd, the airport and the Jeju Air offices were raided by the police. They wanted to capture whatever data, maybe the training records, the pilot records, the training opportunity there, as well as the airport, anything that had to do with the localizer, obviously that brick wall that they ran into at the end of the runway of runway 19. The police raided this place. On that same day, they prevented the Jeju president from leaving the country. So if that doesn't seem a little suspect as to why would they block them from leaving the country if there's no blame being had or any suspect of potential safety issues with the company and or the airport, and as well as the keeping them from running from the country. They want to have somebody to be held accountable for this. On January 5th, 2025, the Cockpit Voice Recorder and the flight data recorders were recovered from the aircraft. Now, if you're not sure where the Cockpit Voice Recorders and the flight data recorders are on a Boeing or any aircraft, but in Boeing in particular, this is a 737-800. They keep them in the tail. So if you look at the video of the Jeju Air aircraft, the tail section, which is where the two flight attendants survived near these aft doors, were the only two people that survived. So if the people that were riding in the tail section of this aircraft could survive this crash, how come the Cockpit Voice Recorder and the flight data recorder could not survive? That for some reason, the data is unreadable on this crash after the tail section is intact. That seems a little suspect, doesn't it? So what we have now is what appears to be a cover-up. You know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist here, but an accident that happens that we all need to learn something from requires the ability to go to the crash site and figure out what had happened. And we can see that this airplane obviously had a problem out there on final. We can see it hit birds. We're not doubting that. We're not saying the plane didn't hit any birds. What we are saying is would a simple bird strike on final bring down a 737-800? And 99.9% of us, I'm sure there's a few of us that think that that's totally possible to bring down an airplane that all of these things that happened on this flight 2216, were so bad that we knocked out not only one engine but both engines. We knocked out the landing gear too. That we knocked out the electrical systems, the main normal power sources for the aircraft and its backup systems, including the battery, all offline as a result of a simple bird strike, which happens quite frequently on flights, and it doesn't bring down anybody. It's extremely, extremely, extremely unlikely that this flight had such bad luck that both engines were knocked out, but miraculously the right engine, which is the one that had compressor stall, which does not mean that it flamed out, you guys. It doesn't mean it wasn't making any power. It doesn't mean that it wasn't still running. It could have been damaged and still produce thrust. So when you do have a bird strike, in any training event that I've ever been in and that has been recommended to me by other people that have had situations, is if you have a problem, if an engine rolls back and quits on final, any sort of engine malfunction, either due to a bird strike or it just quits, you would just continue and land. You're in a position to land, you're stabilized, your flaps are out, your gear's out, one or more engines is running, and even if both engines quit out there on final, you would still glide down and land at the airport straight ahead, which this crew did not do. Okay, so continuing on with my timeline, January 7th, the news reported that the CVR was transcribed, and it was in the process of being transcribed, and they would have that data in a day or so. That was on the 7th, okay? 4 days ago, still no transcription, and hadn't heard anything back. What my recollection, or what my feeling is on this, that they got the transcript, and they didn't like what they read. And it didn't read very favorably to the pilots. It didn't read favorably to Jeju Airlines. It didn't read favorably to the culture of the Koreans, and no offense, but there is a cultural issue that has been brought up and brought to my attention of this superiority situation of the captain in the left seat has such high level of commanding of respect that the other crew member would not feel it appropriate to say anything or reprimand or encourage or offer guidance or do what we call cockpit resource management, CRM. So if the co-pilot doesn't feel safe to say anything to a captain that's making an error, that puts the flight in danger. It's unsafe. In our world, I fly the 777, but I have been a captain on the 737 for years. The way I open up the cockpit conversation is, as we enter the cockpit, hey, we're both out here together. If you see me doing anything that's against procedure, if I'm doing anything that doesn't seem right, something you don't understand, if it doesn't look right, say something to me so that we can get on the same page and make a correction and provide the safest possible outcome to whatever it is that we're doing. To open up the door for the co-pilot to help me in the event of me making an error, which we are all human and we could make an error, as obviously this situation occurred. We also had on the 8th, January 8th, the Transportation Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport. So the Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, his name is Park Sang-woo, said on the 8th that he feels responsible and he's going to retire. He's going to quit. Is that before or after he heard the transcript? Okay, so on the 7th, the CVR was transcribed. On the 8th, the minister quits. That doesn't seem suspect. And now here we are on the 11th that they come out, they say both black boxes are blank. 4 minutes after impact of the birds, the last 4 minutes of the flight, in other words, blank. We have nothing. I don't think this is possible. Okay, so here's the reality of this thing is those black boxes, to the best of my recollection and what seems reasonable to me, is they're powered by the battery. It is the thing that needs to keep running so we can have an incident and learn something from it. The CVR can't just stop running if we lost one or more engines. The CVR can't just stop running if the engine quits, or we literally have 2 engine-driven generators. Clearly one was running. Anyway, the right one was running. So there really is no way to not have this thing have been powered. Failing that, the battery. This thing was going to be running on the hot battery bus. There's no way that you could have disabled the cockpit voice recorder or the flight data recorder for really any reason. And Boeing would most likely back me up on this. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Boeing. If we somehow have failed to make it so that you can have an accident, and get no data from these cockpit voice recorders or the flight data recorder after post crash is a mystery to me. Particularly, 2 people in the tail survived. So I don't believe that the crash impact was high enough in the tail section to kill the people in the back. Therefore, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder should be totally usable at this point. So what I see here, you guys, is another opportunity to excel and to get this right. We've got to get that data, and hopefully the NTSB and the FAA are on board on this thing, and they're looking at that cockpit voice data recorder, and they are going to miraculously recover it, even after the Korean government has failed to acknowledge that the transcript is available, and they just don't like the outcome of it. That's what it's looking like. This is actually the worst crash in Korea in 27 years. Okay, if you look up online, the Mayday air disaster for Korean Airlines Flight 801, the tail number was Hotel Lima 7468. It was a 747-400. It was flying into Guam. It was going to land on 6 left. It crashed 3 miles short of the runway on August 6th, 1997. If you're interested in looking this crash up, of the 254 people on board, 228, I believe, were killed. I believe 26 survived. And that is a chillingly similar incident to this. And you say, well, how could that be? Captain Park, I believe, was flying that aircraft in the middle of the night. It was like a 1:30 in the morning incident. It was a ILS approach with the glide slope out of service. And essentially that makes it a non-precision approach. What they found in that incident was that they had deliberately ignored SOP. They deliberately descended below the step downs along this approach. So normally when you fly an ILS, what you've got is an airplane that flies at, say, 4,000 feet, intercepts the localizer, which is the center line for the runway, and you track that inbound, and then you descend on a 3-degree glide all the way to usually 200 feet, and you need a half a mile visibility. And in that particular instance, the weather was a factor. It was raining in Guam, and it was night. Okay, a little different, obviously, than the flight here in Wuhan, where the weather was perfect, VFR, no wind, no weather. But what I'm getting at here is the ability for a pilot to go out to a certain distance, set up a normal glide, which is usually 3 degrees, and descend on a glide path to a safe position to land, configured, stabilized, and ready to land. Well, that's where 2216 was when they hit birds. They did a little whiffle-dill. I think they might have tried to pitch up. They gained 100 feet, even though they had a big zoom, which is initially a pretty quick rate of climb, but they only went up 100 feet. So it looked to me like from where they were when they had this bird strike, they were in a position to land, and they should have just landed straight ahead, which is what any pilot would have done. That I would have done the same thing. That I think we all would have. Okay, so why they didn't do that from out there? They somehow trained themselves improperly to, when you hit birds or have any malfunction at all, you yell out Mayday and you say go around, and you just begin to go around blindly. I just certain situations like this one would not require that, but and wouldn't be encouraged to do that. It puts you actually in a less safe situation. So now that they did this kind of illegal or not necessary, inappropriate, I should say, go around, how do they get themselves in a position to land? So now the pilot has to be able to do a visual approach. How do we know where we need to be in order to make a safe landing? Okay, and that's where this Flight 801 seems that they didn't know how to do that. And when I'm flying, let's say I'm going to fly to London, and I put in my fixed page, those of you who fly Boeings or maybe Airbus has a situation as well, in the fixed page, I put EGLL in there, and this way I know my distance from the field at all times, whether I'm going to go line up and land on 27 left or 27 right, or if there was another runway. So it doesn't really matter, but I know my distance from the field. so that I can calculate my altitude in my head as to what distance I need to be in order to make a safe landing. Okay, so let's put ourselves back in that 737-800, and we just did a go around that we didn't need to do, and we have an engine out. Okay, so we got some other issues, but where do I need to put myself in order to make a safe landing on 19 going the other way at the right speed, at the right altitude, and so on? And if I would have had the Muon airport identifier code, in my case, I put EGLL in for London, but you put in the Muon airport identifier, usually a 4-letter code. And now I need to calculate my distance from the field so that I can put myself on a 3-degree glide, approximately, and put myself in a safe position to land. And the way I do this is I do a formula called 3 times the altitude. So if I want to be in a position to land and I want to be at 1,000 feet, 1,000 feet times 3 is 3 nautical miles. So I need to fly through this window of 1,000 feet above the ground at approximately 3 nautical miles from the field. And then my next window that I need to get is to 300 feet and a mile. So I take 300 feet, I multiply it times 3, 3 times 3 is 900, subtract off the zeros, and I end up with 0.9. So I need to be approximately 300 feet and 1 mile from the field. Did Flight 2216 hit that window at all? Did they get to 1,000 feet in 3 miles? Or did they keep it in tighter than that? And if they did they hit the 300 feet and a mile approximately? And were they on speed there? And if they weren't in a position to land. That crash was beginning to happen way farther from the airport and not being configured and being 180 knots, okay? All of those pieces were starting to really get them to be what? High and fast and not configured and not in a position to land safely. Terrible airmanship, right? When that happens, you cannot make a safe landing, okay? Everybody's asking, why did they put the gear down? And we're still wondering this. And because they were not in a position to land really anywhere after they put the gear up, they were in a position to land, and they hollered out go around, which we would say go around, toga, which brings the power up. Of course, now you're gonna do it manually because they had some kind of a engine malfunction. So toga brings the flight directors up. Go around brings the power up. Now you got bad engines, maybe you didn't want that, but now that's happening. And then you would say, flaps 20, positive rate, gear up. So now you got the flaps coming up to 20, you've got the gear coming up, and now you're doing this downwind entry. Now, why would you bring the rest of the flaps all the way up? Especially if you're gonna keep it in close. The flaps should have stayed out at 20. That didn't happen. Those came all the way up. We're not sure why. Now the airplane is completely clean, and it's turning in close, and it's not in a position to land. And if he finds himself higher than 300 feet in a mile, if he's higher, what's gonna happen to his airspeed when he pushes the nose over, you guys? Simple math is gonna tell you now the speed's gonna start accelerating, and he's going to get to the numbers too high, too fast. Even if he closed the throttle there, he literally went by the approach end of the runway at well in excess of 180 knots, probably closer to 200 knots, and he touched down midfield at 180 plus knots, 3 nautical miles a minute on no wheels. This thing was such a wreck from way earlier. So the fact that they plowed into a concrete wall at the end of the runway is even, it's just another piece of this thing that it just shouldn't have happened. Now I'm reasonably confident that we've got a pretty good idea of what happened here. We needed the CVR, we need the cockpit voice recorder, we need the flight data recorder to verify these things. And I know a lot of you are like, how could you say anything without really having all the data? Does anyone find it really disturbing that we don't have the data when we see what happened with video? Now, if there was no video, you guys, and we didn't know, this is just a fireball at the end of the runway, and we don't know what happened, and we don't know how long they had to work anything, and this all happened with no data. We know it. They made this happen within 4 minutes, from a bird strike to a go around to swooping in to make a really hairy approach and landing with one engine out. This was totally not. It should not have ended in nearly everyone dying. This is such a routine, minor emergency that turned into a much worse situation. The gear should have been able to come down. With the left engine, looked to me like the left engine was shut down, and I still stand by that. It looked to me like the left engine was shut down. It might have had a bird strike in that engine, and they might have begun shutting it down. If you're within the confines of the airport and the engine is still producing thrust, there was no reason to shut it down. It could have kept windmilling, could have kept running. If it's making thrust and you're less than 1,000 feet above the ground or near the airport and you need to land, our SOP and our common sense would tell us that I want to leave an engine running if it's making some power and we need it to kind of position ourselves and get ourselves situated to land. You would still call Mayday. Yes, you would. That's fine. You'd still say roll the trucks. That's fine. You still would have landed to the north, but if you did check away and want to land to the south and keep the motors running, that could have worked out well as well. Gear down, flaps 20. We have some thrust in both engines. They might have opted to land flaps 20, okay, or maybe even flaps 30, okay, with some thrust. And if they didn't feel like they had enough thrust for that, they might have landed flaps 20, which would have been like a single engine flap setting with both motors running more or less, with some damage in both engines, possibly. What's great about Boeing, you guys, I know you guys think that I'm a big Boeing fan, and I am. I feel safe in Boeing's. To talk about Boeing's briefly here, Boeing's philosophy is the pilot shall make the decision of whether to shut an engine down or not. I believe there is some schools of thought, like at Airbus, would say that, you know, if the engine's not running well, the engine will auto shut down. Like, in my mind, thank you, Boeing, for leaving it up to us. If we're in a situation where we've had one engine malfunction and possibly two engines that have had bird strikes, let us decide the level of damage that we have on either or both engines and decide which engine, if any, is appropriate to shut down. And if the time is critical, we may need them both running all the way to the airport, all the way to possibly a crash site. I think that's awesome that Boeing allows us to make that decision. I would have most likely opted to not touch anything. We would have kept both motors running. Therefore, when we reach for that gear handle, that gear would have come down. It would have come down with the handle. If it didn't come down with the handle and we had floated out there a little ways, maybe to a 3-mile final or 4-mile final, down to 1,000 feet to get ourselves into a position to land, that would have been enough time to have my co-pilot, which in this case, you know, let's talk about the pilot's experience a little bit. From what I understand, the captain was a military pilot with about 6,800 hours. And you guys are thinking, oh, that's a ton of time. That's amazing amount of flight time. That's great. It's not that much flight time. So 6,800 hours to me is like, yeah, you know, you've been flying a while. A lot of flight time for me is 20,000 hours. You are starting to really get to where you have experience that to really draw on and to ponder on. To me, 6,000 hours is kind of like, yeah, you're kind of a mid-time pilot. You've got some experience, but you haven't seen everything yet. Obviously, that proves to be a case here. He didn't quite have all the pieces that he needed, and he panicked. And then you reach to the right seat, and you got a 1,600-hour pilot, which I believe is very, very, very low time. Almost to the part where the captain, who was jittery, had a co-pilot who was not very helpful. And was that dynamic, that power dynamic, causing the captain to not be able to have someone in the right seat that was going to question him? That's a problem. And if and when the co-pilot had the confidence to say, hey, I think we ought to put the gear down, did he say that? And if he didn't say it, wow, shame on him. The co-pilot and the captain are going to reach the crash site at the same moment. It is his responsibility, the co-pilot, to say something, like I said in my briefing. Hey, if I'm making a mistake, or if I'm rushing you, or if we're not ready, say, hey, boss, I'm in the yellow here, or I'm in the red. I'm not with you. I don't know where we're at. I don't know what we're doing. Okay, let's stop the airplane. Let's put the parking brake on. Let's talk about it, right? In this case, in flight, if the co-pilot is not with me and he's hanging on by the tail skid back there somewhere, we need him to get up into the cockpit and say, hey, which checklist are we on? We're on the landing checklist. Zero it out. and we need to go back and hit the items. Are we going to be able to make this airport? What flap set are we going to use? What brakes are we going to use? We're going to put the gear down, right? Oh, shoot, we don't have the gear down. Why? Because we put the gear up a while ago. Why did we do that? Well, we made a go around that we weren't anticipating. So get back in the game, get in the front seats of the jet, get your co-pilot to help you. And while you're hand flying this thing around the pattern, your co-pilot should be saying, are you ready for the before landing checklist, boss? And he'd say, yeah, let me have it. And he starts reading it off. And we get to the gear and you say, we don't have any gear. The handle's down, but the gear lights aren't there. Oh, we must not have the wheels. That's when the co-pilot would reach down and grab those toggles, which is like starting a lawnmower back there. There's 3 of them. You reach down and you grab them and you pull this thing out. It's like 3 feet long, a cable, and it's literally pulling the up locks up off the landing gear and letting them free fall. They will come down with gravity. There's no reason why the landing gear would not come down manually extension on a 737 by pulling those handles. They just didn't do it. Okay, so this is my analysis of what happened. I'm terribly disappointed in the Korean government to withhold this data. There's no way it failed, in my mind. Now, if prove that it did, I mean, literally in this particular incident, everything else I've seen is been so grossly incorrectly handled that there should be an investigation, really, as to why the investigation has gone so badly and why 179 people are dead as a result of Jeju Airlines flight crashing in Muwon. So thank you for watching my channel. If you like what you see here, please click the subscribe and like. Do comments. If I did make a mistake or I've got anything wrong here, please go ahead and comment, ask questions. I will address them as soon as I can and answer them in my next video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.